Hello and welcome to today's video. Today's video will attempt to answer the question, how close is too close? But seriously, folks, welcome. Today's video is another composition tip video. This one is all about getting closer and by doing that, filling the frame more with the subject of your photo. This is the third in a series of videos about composition tips, and there will be a couple more, at least one more to come. If you'd like to see the rest of the series, I will link to the playlist, or at least the previous video, up here. So, what is so special and powerful about getting closer to your subject? I'm glad you asked. I think there's a lot of things that are good that happen when you get closer to your subject. So one of the things that happens when you get closer to your subject is you reduce the impact of the background. When you're closer to your subject, the background will maybe even disappear, or because you're filling the frame with your subject, the background will have less opportunity to create distraction. The second cool thing that happens when you get closer to your subject and fill the frame with your subject is your subject can become abstract. It can become more textures and lines and shapes, less distinct and more artsy. A third thing that happens kind of related to the first thing is connected to the background. When you get closer to your subject, you're creating more relative distance to the background, which means the background is going to go blurrier, which means it will be less in focus, which means it will again be less distracting, less distinct, and your subject in the foreground will be more distinct. And you get to see all the details. I love the little leaf that's taking a ride here on this snail. And another cool thing that happens when you get closer to your subject is you have the opportunity to create deeper intimacy and connection with your subject, especially if your subject has eyes, like my son's dog here, Keanu. Yeah, so getting closer, there's so many cool things that happen when you do that. It is an easy opportunity to create more interest in your photos. And one technique I'll often use, and I think the real reason I started using this getting closer technique is because I was, when I first started getting back into photography, I was taking a lot of photos at car shows. And if you've ever been to a car show, you know that there's cars upon cars upon cars upon cars, plus lots and lots of people. So it's hard to create a photo of a single car that gets the whole car in the frame without a whole bunch of other stuff. Let me show you what I mean. So here is this cool Lincoln Continental. I love this color. I don't know what year, I apologize, but it's at a car show here in Issaquah at XXX Root Beer Drive-In. And you can see all the distractions. We've got trees, we've got light posts, we've got mountains, and we've got other cars. Okay, so in a situation like this, what I'll do is get closer and pick out some details. So I'll do something more like this. I love the old typography on these cars. Each car had its own unique typography. So details, a part of the whole. You're not telling the whole story often when you're getting closer to your subject, but you're picking maybe interesting bits, interesting pieces, interesting elements, and using that as your subject. So I asked at the beginning of this video, how close is close enough? And that is a good question. My suggestion and preference is to get as physically close as possible to my subject. That's my starting point. See what it looks like there. What you're going to have to work with when you do this is something called minimum focusing distance. This is a function of each lens on your camera. How close can you get and still have the lens accurately focus on your subject? It varies. Some lenses will let you get as close as 6 inches or even closer. I'll talk about those in a minute. Most lenses, though, are about 1 foot to 2 feet as a minimum focusing distance. So if your minimum focusing distance is this much and you want to get this close to your subject, it won't focus. If you find you really like close-up photography, and I do, there's two options you have for getting around the minimum focusing distance of most lenses. The first is what's called a macro lens, and this is a lens that's designed to focus closely. It will also focus far away, but it's designed to focus very close and produce close to or more than one-to-one image magnification on your subject. So this means you get really close, you get large image, lots of details, and those are awesome. They also tend to be more expensive. Usually they start around $400. They can go to multiple $1,500, $2,000 or more. So there is another option if you don't want to spend that much money on a somewhat specialized lens. And this is the option I use. It's called extension tubes. I have a whole video about this, which I will link here. Extension tubes are awesome because they work with every lens you have. They're designed individually for each camera system. So these are for Fuji. Won't fit on your Canon or Nikon or Sony or Panasonic or Olympus. Did I forget anybody? I don't think so. So this goes on the back of my camera. So here's how this works. So this will go on my camera first, and then the lens goes to the extension tubes. These are awesome for several reasons. First, they are less expensive. This set of tubes I have are, I think, about $70. You can get less expensive ones that are mostly plastic. I don't recommend that. If you go with first-party ones like from Fuji, they are more expensive. They're about $120, $130. So I go with the middle one. All they need to do is connect physically to your camera and pass the focusing and camera information from the lens to the body. Pretty easy. So what these do now, once you have this on, is it lets you focus more closely with your lens. It also means it only lets you focus closely with your lens. So now anything, and it'll vary by each lens. If it's more than probably a foot or two away, this will all be out of focus. So now I've just made this lens a close only focus lens, okay? So this lets you get really, really close. So I can get down to about 6 inches with this lens combination here and the two tubes. There's two tubes here. An 11 millimeter and a 16 millimeter. Nope, excuse me, 10 millimeter and 16 millimeter. All right, so you're close to your subject, you're filling the frame. What else do you need to think about? It does get a little technical at this point. Here's why. When you're really close to the subject and magnifying the subject in your frame, everything is magnified, including motion. So if your subject is moving at all, like a flower in the breeze, or if you, while you're taking the photo, are having a little bit of motion in your body when you're creating the image, that will be magnified. So let's talk through some scenarios and talk through some solutions for that. So first, if the subject is moving or potential camera motion, what I suggest is keeping your shutter speed above 250th of a second. Additionally, I also will put my camera in the burst mode, so I will be doing with each shutter press. So I'll get 3 to 4 or 5 photos per second, and the goal is one of those 3 to 5 photos will be a combination of image not moving and camera not moving, and just keep clicking till it works. Okay. The other thing to do with that is if your lens has image stabilization on it, turn that on. If your camera body has image stabilization, also turn that on. That'll help you be stable. So if you are, here's another scenario. If you are needing shutter speeds of longer duration than 1/250th of a second, so slower shutter speeds, I suggest a tripod. I'm not a fan of tripods because I can never get them quite to the composition I want, but sometimes you got to do it. I will show you some photos later on where I took with the tripod, and it made a world of difference because I just couldn't do it without the tripod. All right, so when shutter speed is slower than even 1/15 of a second, so maybe it's darker, or you don't want to raise your ISO to get a faster shutter speed, then you use a tripod. And the other thing you'll need to create a sharp image is some kind of remote shutter release or self timer. Because what happens is when your camera's on a tripod at 1/15 of a second, just pushing the shutter down creates enough motion in the camera that it's just going to wiggle a little bit, and you won't have as sharp an image. So what I do is I just use a self timer. I set it for 2 seconds, I click, and then 1, 2, the camera takes the photo without me touching it. Another scenario to pay attention to is when you are this close to your subject, your depth of field, so the amount of the image from front to back that's in focus, is very shallow. So even at relatively large apertures like 5.6 or 8, so big numbers but small lens openings, you will not have very much in focus. So I suggest using apertures of at least f8 or f11, f16 to get more of your image in focus. Because when you're 6 inches away from your subject, your depth of field at f8, f11 might be only a half an inch to an inch. So be aware of that. So those are some technical considerations when you're getting closer. So here is your assignment if you choose to accept it. I guess even if you don't choose to accept it, here's your assignment. Over the next week, go out and create some images. And what you're going to concentrate on in creating these images is have the subject fill the frame, be the major portion of what fills up the image. And the easiest way to do that is to physically get closer. Okay, so take 2 or 3 times, if you can go out during the week, create some photos, spend 15, 20 minutes each time. It's good exercise for your brain, for your body, for your camera, using techniques and figure all that stuff out. Another part of this assignment would be to, on each of your lenses, see if you can work out what the minimum focusing distance is, what lens combinations you like to use for getting closer to your subject. Some people like really close and wide. It creates a very different look than close when you're telephoto or maybe a more standard focal length. See what combinations you like because they look different. Especially if you have a zoom lens, the minimum focusing distance might change across the zoom range. So it might be slightly different when you're at the wider end than at the telephoto end. So be aware of that. So create your images, select some favorites, edit them, post them out there to the interwebs. And if you would like, please share them in the comments below. I'd love to take a look at your photos, see what you're doing. It's always fun to see how other people interpret a concept and an idea. So please share those. So I thought what I do next, as I do at the end of these videos, is share a few of my images I created as I was doing this assignment over the past week. I'll share the camera settings and some thoughts behind it, and then we will conclude this video. All right, so let's start with this first image. This is just right outside the door of our condo. And it was, of course, whenever you decide you want to do close-up photos, it's gonna be a windy day. So it was really windy. I tried doing this handheld. Even at 1/250th of a second, I was just a little too shaky because these are down low and holding the camera. It's an awkward position. So I put the camera on a tripod. I'm using the extension tube on my 18-135 at 135 millimeters, f11. And then I was also in burst mode. So I was taking 3 to 5 pictures with each shutter press. And so I have about 20 photos of this flower from this setting. And there were about 3 that were sharp from a combination of a little bit of camera, the breeze moving in and out of focus and motion there. So burst mode, tripod, f11, 1/60th of a second. This is a photo of, what do you think this is? What is it? It's a pine cone. So pine cones are starting to fall already here in May in Sammamish, Washington. Again, 1/60th of a second. I'm on a tripod. It's not moving. It's indoors, so I did not use burst mode, just a single click and away we go. Again, using the extension tube. I love this kind of thing where you take ordinary stuff and it starts to become a little abstract or look different or take on other characteristics. One of my favorite things to do in photography. Speaking of abstract, what do you think this is? If you guessed the chair I'm sitting on, you are correct. This is the back of the chair when it's in front of my shelf unit back there. Again, the background goes blurry. You can't see any details. I think this looks like DNA strands or something to me. So what do you see? This is handheld. So no tripod. Using the image stabilization in the lens, which is pretty good. I was able to get into a good handheld position and create a couple photos, and this one was sharp. Again, handheld, turned up the ISO to 3200. If your camera lets you do that and it doesn't create a lot of noise, it is a good thing. So this is just to zoom in on the embroidery on my Seattle Mariners baseball hat. Go M's. We're over 500. Yay. And then last photo here that I'll share is a gift from my son to my wife, Debbie, for Mother's Day. He got her some flowers, and these are just sitting on our kitchen counter with some late afternoon light coming in. So ISO is 3200, so I had to turn it up a little bit. Again, 1/60th of a second handheld. Took a few clicks to get one that was good and sharp. So there you have it. Some thoughts on a composition technique of getting closer to your subject, potentially filling the frame with your subject so that all you see is the subject. It gives you an opportunity to look at things differently, to reduce distractions, to create intimacy, and just it's an easy way to create more interesting photos. And all you have to do is use your feet. So there you have it, some ideas for creating interesting photos by getting closer to your subject. And by getting closer to your subject, you're going to tend to fill the frame with the subject, which means there's less room for distractions, opportunity to create abstractions, opportunity to create intimacy with your subject, to transform it into something that it doesn't look like at a normal viewing distance. So if you have some ideas or tips for composition, I'd love if you leave them below. Thoughts on this video as well. As a YouTube content creator, I am, believe it or not required by law to ask you to subscribe to this channel, but I would be grateful if you did. And if you would like this video, that would help train the YouTube algorithm about quality content on the internet. And if you share it, my goodness, all sorts of wonderful things will happen. So I hope you have fun creating photos in the weeks ahead. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So until we meet again, stay well, take care, and bye for now.